Welcome to the Marketing Millennials, the No BS Marketing Podcast. I'm Daniel Murray, and join me for unfiltered conversations with the brains behind marketing's coolest companies. The one request I tell our guests, stories or it didn't happen. Get ready to turn the up.
I care deeply about developing like a true brand philosophy up front, but like sometimes done is better than perfect. And it's just really good to get user feedback and you can always evolve.
Welcome back to another episode of the Marketing Millennials. Today we're diving into building a brand from zero, when to name it, how to position it, and the key steps to get started. Joining us is Arielle Spiegel, a brand building powerhouse with 15 years of experience from co-founding Co-Fertility to working with iconic brands like Victoria's Secret's Pink and Coach. She's here to share how she helped brands go from idea to impact. Let's get into it. So, Arielle, I wanted to start off and ask, how did you get into marketing?
So way back in the day, I actually, like when I was starting out in college, I actually wanted to get into journalism. I always loved writing. Growing up, I was always coming up with crazy stories. I had editorial internships. And one day I actually got lucky and got an internship somewhere here in Boston, which is where I'm from. But on the other side of kind of like what makes content successful, it was a digital marketing internship. That was just what I was lucky to kind of get and land at the time. And it actually really stuck with me. I learned, content is definitely king, but, there's so much more involved with making content successful and resonate with people and reaching the right people. And if a tree falls in the woods and nobody hears it, it kind of doesn't really matter. So that was when I kind of first got the marketing bug. I think that was the summer after my sophomore year of college. And it's been sticking ever since.
So you've worked at some cool companies, Coach, Victoria's Secret, but you also started your own brand, Co-Fertility. What is your first steps of starting a brand? What should a person start thinking about for the first step? I'm starting a brand. What are the first things I should start thinking about?
Well, something really important that I think people, and I'm assuming everyone who's listening is obviously in marketing themselves, but if somebody's starting a company, they really should think about bringing on a co-founder with marketing expertise, or at the very least, like an early stage employee, because you don't know what you don't know, and I think it's really important to be able to define from the beginning who your audience or audiences are. And because you can't just build a product and then figure out how to market it. You really need to understand who you're building it for, what their needs are, and then, you can kind of discuss how to bring it to market. But that really should have a seat at the table from the very beginning. So, that's kind of the first step, first and foremost, is just to make sure that there's like a true marketer really in the room. But yeah, going back to just like audience segmentation, that to me is really the ground level step of defining a brand. And because from there, you can really kind of figure out like, what are those audiences' pain points? What problems are you trying to solve? Oftentimes founders, when they start companies, they themselves have one-on-one or personal experience with an actual problem or a gap in the market somewhere. But they haven't really like sat down and figured out, the nitty gritty of exactly, what pain points their product or their company is going to solve. So really understanding, what are the psychographics of those audiences? What drives them? What are their hopes and dreams? Not just their demographics, although that, definitely is super important. But, in Co-Fertility's sake, for example, we were very, very intentional from the beginning, my co-founders and I, in feeling like it needed to kind of be divided up into two separate but related brands. So on one side of the company, there's Freeze by Co, which helps women freeze their eggs more accessibly and affordably, even hopefully free, if they donate half of the eggs retrieved to another family that can't conceive. So gay dads, those with infertility, cancer survivors, and others, making that part of the problem a little bit easier for people who potentially want to freeze their eggs but can't afford it, or they just want to donate eggs, because they're motivated by doing really good for another family. Then the other side of the company is Family by Co, which is a tech-enabled matching platform for intended parents seeking egg donors to grow their families. So those, all those people that I mentioned before who would be potentially working with an egg donor. I say that to clarify that like these are two extremely separate audiences. A 25-year-old grad student has completely different, values, hopes, and dreams. They are engaging in a different way than, say, like the 40-year-old gay dads who are hoping to give their child a sibling. So really, really defining those audiences is like absolutely critical before you can really kind of dive in and like developing what that brand actually looks and feels like.
Yeah, I want to go into that a little bit. So you first figure out the audience. Product marketers are probably the best at doing this. That I found product marketers are the best at finding out audience, going through strategy, talking market research, doing that up front. I think so many brands don't do that up front, which is kind of scary. They're like a year in and they still don't really know exactly who their audience is, or haven't really talked to many people. They just had an idea and wanted to start with it.
Right.
So you found these audiences. Is that when you came up with name and branding? How did that happen?
Yeah. Well, so co-fertility has actually kind of like gone on its own branding journey. I founded the original co-fertility, which really started out as like a content focused site that aims to provide resources and tools for people who were facing fertility challenges. So I was still at Victoria's Secret Pink at the time. Um, my husband had just sold his company. I was interviewing with other brands and thinking about my next move. We were thinking of moving to Boston. But all the while, we were having a really hard time getting and staying pregnant. All in all, it ended up taking us like about 2.5 years to get pregnant with my first son. And even though I was talking with these other companies, I had this like nagging feeling that I wanted to do something in the fertility space. And this was 2018 at the time. I felt like anytime you ever Googled any fertility related question, the consumer experience was pretty poor. It was like really janky forums, blogs that were very anecdotal, fertility clinic sites that were very impersonal. And there was nothing out there that felt like truly educational and informative and useful and trustworthy, but still with like a brand tone of voice and personality that really could like connect with consumers. And, I was really, I felt like there was a huge white space for that in the market, because fertility challenges affect 1 in 4 American people trying to conceive will face some sort of fertility challenge, really. They used to say 1 in 8, then it was 1 in 6. Now, we're kind of seeing it might be 1 in 4. So I knew this was like a really underserved market. So that's how co-fertility originally began. And, really just like aiming to provide that content that felt really trustworthy, but like actually relatable. And, fast forward about like a year and a half after I had launched that company, I ended up joining forces with who eventually became my co-founder, Hallie Tecco, who's this really prominent and really respected entrepreneur and investor in the health tech space. We had collaborated a ton within the fertility space because she had launched her company Natalist around the same time. So we were kind of partners in that way, and she had kind of mentioned the idea of what co-fertility eventually evolved into being, and her, myself, and our third co-founder Lauren Mackler, who is still she is CEO of the company. She comes from Uber. The three of us fundraised. We raised about 5 million for our seed round from all female investors, which was really exciting. And we built in stealth for about a year. And then we publicly launched in the fall of 22. But going back to your question about the name, when we were building the company, that was like really a sticking point was figuring out, what our name could be, because we already had the name Co-Fertility, which is what I had kind of come up with originally. The way that I kind of came about that was I was just kind of thinking about all of the emotions and all of the feelings that I really wanted this brand to evoke. I wanted to make sure people felt supported, that there was a sense of community, compassion. We wanted to, and the prefix co just really kept kind of sticking out in my mind as a way to emphasize that people are not doing this alone. As the company eventually evolved to focus a little bit more on third party reproduction and the donor space, that just becomes even more symbolic, right? We did go on like a whole naming journey when we were taking co-fertility in this new direction. And, I joined forces with my co-founders, and we were not set on keeping co-fertility. We really did a lot of brainstorming. We hired naming consultants, and, we debated and brainstormed, and, we actually came pretty close a couple times to naming the company something different. But, everyone we talked to was kind of like, why don't you just stick with co-fertility? It plays so well into what you guys are doing and this sense of community and that you're providing. So ultimately, we just like stuck with it, and I'm really glad we did. I really do think it's like the perfect name for the company still.
It is a great name, but I want to go into, so you first figure out when you're starting a brand is you do deep audience segmentation. For your case, you kind of had to serve two markets because it was a marketplace basically.
Yep. I mean, anyone who's like starting a company or who's starting to, or who's thinking about marketing an early stage company, kind of like creating a brand from zero. You know, if you're starting a company or you're working on launching a company, you kind of already have an idea of like the problem you're trying to solve. Obviously that needs to be articulated, but really that first step is defining those audiences, figuring out like how they think, how they feel, what platforms they engage on, what kind of things do they talk about at their dinner table at night? What are their aspirations? What other brands are they consumers of? Where would they travel? What music would they listen to? All of that really would kind of go into that audience segmentation exercise. And then, once you kind of have figured out like who you're trying to serve and you already kind of know what the problem is that you're trying to solve, that's when you can kind of start to move into that next phase of really defining, what is the company's mission, really refining, there are a lot of really great AI tools out there. I mean, chat gpt, if somebody like doesn't necessarily have the knowledge of like different tools, even just like a chat gpt would be amazing at just kind of helping refine, what you think the problem is that you're trying to solve into just like a really clear and concise elevator pitch. Ideally, that would have already been done with whatever your pitch deck looks like, because you'll need to be able to kind of concisely define your business in order to help raise capital. But really, that's when you guys can figure out what your brand stands for, because you'll need to understand your audience first, and then you'll be able to figure out like how to tap into that audience and what would resonate with them.
For people who don't know, so I'm just trying to recap everything so everybody who's listening. So first, please figure out your audience, do audience research, understand their problems, understand their pain points beyond demographic. Second, now that you've done that, you have to get a statement, an elevated pitch, put that problem into something concise. AI is a great partner when you're starting now because everybody's using it. And if you know how to use it right and prompt it right, you could probably get 90% there. So after that, what is the next step of building a brand?
It depends on the company, right? Because like, as you mentioned, co-fertility is really kind of like a marketplace model. In our case, a lot of what kind of took place next was really defining like the different segments of the business. So if you are launching a brand that carries various products, or actually is like a marketplace model like co-fertility, or has different like subsectors that serve different audiences, getting all of that out on paper is really valuable. And even if it kind of like lives in your brain, developing at least like some kind of a visual that will just really help you clarify the structure of the brand. Because sometimes even within one brand, like you might have different products or just different verticals that speak to different audiences in different ways. And then, you can kind of refine if there's like specific language that you might need to use for different verticals of your brand. That's kind of like what would happen next then, right? Is like actually diving into each specific part of your brand to figure out like what is language that we would use? What is language that we wouldn't use? What are like the specifics around how this works? I'd say the first part of developing a brand from zero is kind of figuring out the more abstract, who are we serving? What problems are we solving? How would we define our business? And then it starts to get a little bit more specific, right? Then you get a little bit more specific into like, well, what is this? What is the structure of this company and this business? And how does that play into like the brand ecosystem? After that is kind of when you would start to figure out like, how does it come to life visually, textually, whether that's figuring out what the brand actually looks like in terms of look and feel, typography, obviously their, logo exploration, color palette, things like that. But I think that tone of voice is actually even more important because that's what's going to determine how that comes to life visually. So I guess I'm jumping around a little bit, but like it would go abstract to specific from like audience definition, business definition, tone and like brand attributes and things we do or don't say. And the visual is actually kind of how that comes to life at the end. And actually naming really should also come at the end of this entire exercise because you want the name, which is so important to really evoke everything that you've already defined.
You also said at the beginning you started this as basically content, right? It was a content machine. How did actually building an audience basically upfront help this journey? I feel like you learn so much from just putting a lot of stuff out there and seeing people's reactions. So how do you recommend when people are starting to start something that like you did where you're putting out a bunch of content, people are reading, you understand your audience deeper and deeper through that? Or could you explain a little bit about that journey you went through?
Yeah, well, I mean, the original co-fertility was like a very SEO focused business. So, a lot of it was, and it's tough because with something like that, you have to be really patient. It's not like an instant gratification. Like if you're running ads on Meta, you will know like within like a week to 2 week period, like what content is kind of resonating versus like what's falling flat. So basically, like while I was building co-fertility and while I was like writing content and building the tools and getting the branding set up and everything, I would like I'm not the most patient person. So I literally just started posting on Instagram. This was in 2018. And originally it started out like, because I didn't really have any branded content to share. And I knew from the beginning that I did not want this to be like a personal influencer situation or blog. Like I wanted co-fertility to be a trustworthy brand. But because I didn't have that yet, I was like, I'm just going to start engaging on Instagram, like within the fertility community, which really is like thriving on social because a lot of people don't have a lot of others to turn to in these situations, even though fertility issues are so common. I started just like posting on Instagram, whether it was like personal updates or reposting other infertility content that like made me laugh, or providing like hot takes on like regulatory updates to fertility treatment mandates in different states around the country. There wasn't a huge strategy to it, except for I wanted to make sure that anything that I posted, felt aligned with what I eventually wanted the brand to feel like once it did launch. So we definitely kind of amassed a little bit of a community on Instagram for sure. That's part of why it made sense for me to join forces with my co-founders, because I really did have this like innate understanding of the fertility community. And we had like this built-in community of so many intended parents or hopeful parents that for the family by co side of co-fertility was extremely relevant. And, figuring out the right way to engage with them kind of early on, I think definitely helped.
I love it. I think so many people take building audience as an underrated thing. And I also like that you said you also curated a lot of content. I think people are afraid of doing that up front. But I still want to go down the journey of you. Now you understand your tone of voice, your brand. What is the step to now go to market with all this cool branding, all this tone of voice, this name? How do you go to market with that?
I think, it still goes back to having just like a really solid understanding of your audience and, where are they engaging, and your kind of marketing mix probably looks pretty different depending on, who you're trying to serve. So Freeze by Co, for example, where we're helping women freeze their eggs, at hopefully an earlier age where they can actually like do something proactive about their fertility. Those women are engaging in like a completely different way on completely different platforms than someone who is Googling trying to find, an egg donor to help them grow their family who like matches their cultural and ethnic background, for example. So in terms of like bringing it to market, you just have to play around with different platforms. Hopefully you'll have a solid understanding of where you should be based on all that audience research and definition you've done up front. But if not, like, especially if you're an early stage company, I'm a big fan of testing. You do have to have a little bit of patience. And, I would encourage early stage founders or marketers at startups to really like embrace testing, make sure every single thing you do is measurable, and make sure that when you do launch, you do it in a way that feels cohesive, but like just test and learn.
I love that there wasn't a specific playbook there because I actually think that a lot of marketers are just trying to figure it out, trying to put a lot of stuff out there, try to figure out what's working and what's not working. It's not like you said. My first step is like I knew I should go to Instagram, and it might be Instagram if you actually knew your audience was just like all hanging out there, which you kind of knew because you posted a bunch of things. But I think that form of testing and figuring things out is a skill that marketers need to overcome at the beginning and now, and having that urge to just keep putting things out there, testing, failing, but also I like the key point you made too of then make sure these tests are measurable.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of like my boss at Victoria's Secret used to say all the time that done is better than perfect. It's hard, especially when we work in marketing and like we hold ourselves to a really high standard. And I always say that like marketing is the one of the only fields where literally Joe Schmo off the street could go on any marketing platform and like criticize how you are performing as a marketer, or weigh in on what you should be doing, or send you things like try this. And that's why I think Marketing Millennials is amazing for like the content you share about everyone and their mother thinking that they're a marketer. But like at the end of the day, it really just like all goes back to trying to understand your audience. And if you need to test and fail and pivot, that's okay, as long as there's not like some massive amount of budget tied to whatever it is that you're testing. If there is, then that might be a different story, and like measure twice, cut once, but just do it. Like if you're building something from scratch, like I know you want to launch it and like for it to be perfect and for it to be this like bright, shiny curtains up moment, because, it should be something you're really proud of. But at the end of the day, like, there might be areas that like you could launch sooner and quietly and get like early feedback or beta test. And, I don't think people should, I care deeply about developing like a true brand philosophy up front, but like sometimes done is better than perfect. And it's just really good to get user feedback, and you can always evolve.
What's the difference of figuring out your audience when you're first about to launch and then you've launched? What is the process of continuing getting feedback and knowledge and figuring out new audiences and figuring out this doesn't work or that doesn't work? What are some things you did for that?
I think just asking your community. Number one, I mean, obviously, like, yes, you would compare metrics. There's there's quantitative feedback and there's also qualitative feedback. So, like I mentioned, you should really only be doing things that you can measure. On some platforms, you'll know pretty early on how things are resonating. On others, it might take more time. So, make sure that you're just like staying on top of, every piece of content that you're coming out with, or, every email you're sending, or whatever your goals might be. It totally depends on the company and the audience, of course. But there's so much value in just like good old fashioned user surveys and interviews. And one of my favorite things to do, I'm not with Co-Fertility full time anymore. I'm an advisor now. But one of my favorite things to do when I was full time with Co-Fertility is, interview our Freeze by Co members. Every single woman who goes through the process and has applied to potentially participate in the split program, where women can freeze their eggs for free if they donate half of the eggs retrieved to another family. We would get on Zoom and connect with them face to face. And, of course, part of it is like informed consent, disclosure, things like that. But the other part is just like hearing from them, like why they want to do this, how they found out about us. Although based on the metrics, we knew how they found out about us, or what brought them in. But like, just hearing straight from them, upfront in that case, but also like throughout the process, like pulse your audience to see if there are any like true brand evangelists who like care so much about what you're doing that they like want to help you guys early on. That's the beauty of an early stage company, is that like your early users or your early community members probably feel like they're brought along the journey with you. And they'll be happy to give you feedback, or at least some will. And if they're not, then you can always incentivize them with like an Amazon gift card. But there's really no substitute for like actual connection with your core audience. I recently got on a Zoom. I had to get a space heater for my son's bedroom. And I was like they really needed some help with their instructional collateral. But I was having some difficulty actually like setting it up. It's this like super techie space heater that I can control from my phone. And I reached out to their customer support, and the CTO actually like got on a Zoom with me and like walked me through the whole process of like the setup and, why they designed it the way they did. And that was like, as a founder, I loved that he did that, because, it's so important to like actually get that face-to-face interaction with your audience, so that you can kind of like hear firsthand how things are resonating, what's working, what's not, and continue to like refine and evolve your brand.
Also, I think it gives you so much insights and data that you don't get from the internet. I mean, even with tracking, you could figure out they might have came from Instagram, but you could talk to them and say, "Oh, my friend told me about your page, and I went to Instagram, or I was here, I saw this first, but this is my first interaction with your brand." Or I'm having trouble doing X, Y, and Z. Can you help me with this? You get so many things that you wouldn't get on a forum or on a
Right.
pixel, basically. Um,
Yeah.
Lastly, what's a marketing hill you would die on?
Marketing hill that I would die on. And, this might be somewhat controversial from an early stage founder, is not to sleep on organic marketing. So much focus is placed on growth marketing, especially when you're launching a company from zero. Obviously, growth is the priority, but depending on the industry that you're in, there's so much value in organic marketing. There's just such a place for it when it comes to actually driving conversion down the line. If it is like a long tail funnel business, like Co-Fertilities, for example, if you have the resources to do it right, I think that a lot of early stage founders do sleep on organic marketing. And it definitely has the potential to help grow your audience if done in the right way.
I mean, I'm always going to plus one organic marketing. I also think if you can build that, you can have a repeatable thing that doesn't rely on these growth engines that a lot of
Yeah.
companies just rely on. And when prices go up, it's harder to sustain that growth you did. But if you have channels that are own channels that are your channels, or a way to connect your audience through an algorithm, you're way more likely to sustain.
Yeah, I think it's hard for early stage founders because they're under so much pressure for growth, but it's tough to sustain. And I think sometimes it can be helpful for people to kind of like think about it in a little bit of a different way, and perhaps like investing money that might have gone into like a paid media strategy in hiring like a kick-ass content marketing specialist or something. It feels different because it's like money going into a hire, but that could potentially lead to more leads and, perhaps growing your audience compared to investing it in paid. That could get like super expensive. So it's challenging. I know I've like worn that hat, but it can pay off if people are patient.
Lastly, where could people find you and what you're doing?
Yeah, people can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Arielle Spiegel. That's Spiegel with a P. And they can also find me on Instagram. I'm Arielle R Spiegel. I do integrated marketing consulting for all different types of brands. I help with growth, brand, and I also help scale happy, efficient, productive marketing teams. So super passionate about all and would love to chat with anyone.
Well, thank you so much for joining and sharing your knowledge, and I truly appreciate it.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for listening. Keep tuning in to hear more great insights from the coolest marketers from around the world. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and follow the Marketing Millennials podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, I would greatly appreciate you giving us a 5-star rating. It helps bring more marketers into our community.